Good morning and welcome to Wednesday. It's May the 24th, 2023. That means it's time for the Education Town Hall here on We App Radio, which is located in the heart of downtown Anacostia. However, we are coming to you live on our virtual platforms, which I consider to be Anacostia adjacent. I first want to begin by thanking the Creator for this day and for the opportunity to present to you the latest installment of the Education Town Hall. This is your humble servant and host, Thomas Bird, and I will be joined shortly by my associate producer, Valerie Jablo. Folks, I'm glad that you were able to tune in with us today, and I'm excited to have our guests join us in studio. In fact, we are being joined today by Maria Blauer, who is the Director of Programs and Outreach at AJE, which is Advocates for Justice and Education. We're also joined by Sheila Carr, who is as a co-founder of Decoding Dyslexia, and I believe Chioma Oruh is going to be joining us. Hopefully, she's scheduled to be here, so maybe she'll be coming shortly. So, but we're glad that folks are here with us today, and welcome to all. I at first want to begin by asking you, Maria, and then I'm going to ask Sheila to give us an explanation. Maria, I want an explanation from you. How do you define special education? And then Sheila, I'm going to ask you to explain dyslexia. So why don't we start with you, Maria? Tell us, what is special education? We've heard so much about this. Folks have heard special education. For those who don't know, please explain what that is.
So special education, and I'm a lawyer, so I have to use the very legal circular definition that Congress, in their infinite wisdom, gave us, which is specialized instruction is instruction provided by a special educator in accordance to the student's IEP. That's the legal definition. I think the best way to think about special education is how we adapt and adjust the general education curriculum so that students with disabilities can receive the instruction they need to achieve a grade level. And
So,
Mhm.
you mentioned an acronym there, please, for those who don't know.
Oh, thank you. And I'm really bad about that, so
That's
you can
okay.
remind me many times. So the acronym was IEP, and that's Individualized Education Plan. And that is the plan that students with disabilities receive, that dictates the services that they're receiving at school and also the goals. But the line I always use, Mr. Bird, that helps me remember and that I use to explain special education is that special education is literally special because it has to go faster than general education. For most of our kids, they need to be making more than a year's progress. And that's what makes special education special. Those teachers are helping kids close the gap, so they're doing literally more. Does that make sense?
It does, and I did not know that they have to be at a faster pace, and that's good to know for me personally, and I'm sure those who are tuned in uh, didn't know that. Many didn't know that as well, so that was great. I'm gonna go over to Sheila, but then I'm gonna come back to you, Maria. I want you to tell us how you got into this work, and I'm gonna ask Sheila to explain dyslexia and tell us how she got into this work, and then we're gonna go to our wonderful Valerie Jablo to engage us in some more in-depth conversation. Sheila,
Yes, can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone.
good afternoon.
Yeah.
I got into dyslexia because I found out when I was 40 that I had dyslexia, and it explained a lot of some of the difficulties that I had. The definition of dyslexia is a neurological disorder, and it can affect the ability of someone to hear sound properly. So they have difficulty with phonics, and it has the way it is not when people say seeing things backwards, that's less than 1% of the people. It's more so of the processing issues. And it can also show up in math and comprehension, because if you can't read, you can't comprehend. So that's just a quick overview of what dyslexia is. And it is in 20% of the population of the school. So if a teacher has um, uh, uh, 20 kids, at least four, 4 to 5 children in that room has dyslexia, and most of them are not diagnosed. So they think that the child is not trying, when the child is really trying as hard as they can, but they're not being fed the way that a dyslexic brain needs to be able to comprehend what you're trying to give them, sounds and things like that, to do it. And once you do that, the light turns on and the child succeeds.
Fantastic. Thank you. Maria, real quickly, how did you get into this work that you find yourself in?
Well, it's long and complicated. And I know Sheila's not going to be with us for long, so I'm literally going to give you the short answer, which is I never got out of this work. I've always been in this work. I came up through the public education system as a student with an IEP, transitioned in high school to not having one. And so it's always been part of what I've done. I've sat at the IEP table as a parent, as a student, as a teacher, and more recently as an attorney and an advocate for students. So I never left. It's always been here.
Fantastic. Where did you go to school?
So I am a proud graduate of Fairfax High School in Fairfax, Virginia, just over the river.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So I know Valerie's chomping at the bit to jump in here, so I'm going to let her do that because, as you mentioned, Sheila is only with us a brief time, so we want to get as much out of her as possible.
Well, I want to put to you both, but Sheila first, as she has literally minutes to go here. One of the guests that was going to be here, and then ended up with a scheduling conflict, was Nadia Roberts, who started this organization called Don't Back Down DC last year, because of her involvement in trying to get what are called free and appropriate education, FAPE. We're all about acronyms here, FAPE, for her child. And that was a real burden for her. But I had a conversation with her last week about her journey. And I wanted to put this to you, Sheila, first. She said there are, and I'm looking at my notes, there are clear barriers to testing and other evaluations to determine whether a child needs special education services, and parents are not notified of their rights regarding free and appropriate educations for their children. So I wanted you, Sheila, before you sign off, to talk about those barriers to identification, because certainly you can speak to this personally as a parent as well as a professional.
Thank you for that, Valerie. Oh, yes, there are many barriers that's put in the way for parents to jump over. And one that I was going to speak about today is that DCPS has taken away the summer team. And so now the IEP process or evaluation will stop in June and it won't pick up until September. So now children who were trying to be processed have to wait an additional month. I don't know why that's not against the law, but the couple of things real quick is that learn the law, because once you walk in there knowing what your rights are as a parent and what your child's rights are that they have to do, you don't have to go through those other processes. When you sign that paper, they don't have to go and evaluate your child to look at them for 30 days. Let me see what they're doing. No. The Department of Education said you don't have to do that. They can go ahead and do an evaluation. And that DCPS has put in another little process where they bring in this team, and the team asks you, Well, what do you think the problem is? Wait a minute, you're the professional. Why are you asking me? Because then when they come down, they'll say, well, the parent never told me. No, put the weight where it belongs, which is on the professional. And lastly, I will say is don't go by yourself, because you're the parent. You can be emotional. You're angry, and so you're not comprehending the way you need to. So you need somebody that, even if they just take notes or they help you with the 1, 2, because it takes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and it's a shame to get it done for your child. And then once you do get it, you still have to stay on them to make sure that that legal document that you can take them to court and sue them on, which is an IEP, but your child will never be 7, 10, 3, 5 again. And those are things that they're supposed to be learning during that time. They're not. And then when you take them to court, they're 10 and 11 and 12. And they're in a whole different mindset, and it's years of aggravation. So I don't know if I hit all you wanted me to say, but those are some of the things that just hit it.
Yeah, everything and more. And this, in fact, reiterates something that Nadia told me, which is that never, ever, ever forget that the schools are responsible for this. You as a parent are not responsible for it. And she really hammered that into me. And I'm like, okay. And I'm taking down notes wildly. Yeah. Thomas, do you want to introduce?
Yeah, Valerie, I just want to mention, I want to know that Chioma Oruh, professor at the Georgetown University Center for Child and Human Development, has joined us. We thank you for joining us, Chioma.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so now that you're here, I want you to fit right in. Continue on, Valerie.
No, I wanted Maria to take up with that, the barriers to identification and, the practical, like, what is a parent supposed to do?
So I want to underline, and I wish we were not on radio and it was, you could see me nodding and giving a thumbs up to everything that Sheila said and everything that Nadia said, because both of these women are absolutely correct. There is a tremendous burden shift. Parents don't get federal funding to provide a free, appropriate public education. Parents don't get federal funding to implement a child find plan to complete this obligation that they have to identify, locate, and evaluate all kids suspected of having a disability. School districts get that money. DCPS, the charters get that money, not parents. And yet parents consistently have the burden placed on them. And you asked about barriers, and I think Chioma will probably speak to this a little bit more. And I'm delighted you've joined us. There's a million barriers that Sheila mentioned. There's, the hoops they make you jump through about, oh, well, don't you want to do this before you do an evaluation? Is it really a problem? Are they far enough behind? There's a million little tiny barriers. And I'm truly alarmed by this giant new barrier of the summer team vanishing at DCPS. That's alarming news, because the law doesn't take a break over summer. So I'm confused about that and concerned. But I think the two big barriers are actually mindset barriers, right? And one of them is that, we talk about thinking education is a civil right and a human right, but we don't act like it. And that's huge, because if we did, things would be very, very different. So I think, we have great rhetoric around education, but the reality is very far. So I think mindset number one is that thinking about it the wrong way and not really acknowledging and prioritizing it as a civil and human right of the child. It's the kid's right to learn to read. It's the kid's right to become a grown, competent adult. And then the other barrier is low expectations, which I just find insulting. I mean, only 15% of kids with disabilities in the District of Columbia are, at or above grade level. 15%. That's ridiculous, because, it should be the exact opposite. the overwhelming majority of people with disabilities are able to function, at or above grade level. And yet, that's not happening here. So I think low expectations are another part of it that, those are big cognitive barriers, and they're going to require a culture change and a mindset shift.
So I know Sheila has to leave us, and it's about 15 after. So here on We Had Radio, Sheila, we always want to part on a positive note. So since you're about to depart from us, share with us what you think are the changes, most pressing changes that you would implement if you were controlling special ed in DC.
Ooh, boy. Okay. One
I know
is
that's a heavy lift, but sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm right there. I'm with you. One is to teach the teachers, the special ed coordinators, and the principals the law, because they do not know it. A lot of them do not know it, because that's half the barrier that you run up to, because you try to do something and they tell you it's not against the law. I mean, it's against the law. And when they do, 2 months later, they say, "Oh, I can do that." So knowledge, teaching the people the law, and also educating the parents about the different ways disabilities show up in children, so the parent can identify and inquire earlier. And lastly, I would say is with the science of reading, and I know this isn't all of special ed, but a bulk of the special ed has to do with the other learner, and which is the reading part and dyslexia, that you train the teachers in the science of reading, all of them, so that it's going across the whole spectrum of the school system, not just in the third grade and below. And to that account, since you want to end at a positive note, all the other stuff I don't get to say, because it's not positive, but it is noteworthy that Decoding Dyslexia, a law that the Lord allowed us to pass, 23-191, is finally going into full effect this year. And the first thing for this year is about dyslexia awareness training for teachers this school year coming, universal screening and reporting this school year, and it has to be done by October. So if you have a kid in pre-K to third grade, look out for that information and go back to that school and find out what they're going to do for your child with those test results that come back. And structured literacy teacher training is supposed to go from this year to next year. And lastly, the reading curriculum, because we don't have a curriculum um, based on the science of reading, is supposed to come out next year. So I really need parents to be diligent as much as you can. And when you can't, go to AGE or the other organizations or Decoding Dyslexia, because we have a support group too that can help you and direct you in the right direction. And Mr. Bird, if you look at a text I sent you 2 screenshots of the complexity of reading and all the different things that it takes to learn to read. If you could put that in the chat or put it on the screenshot so the parents could see that. And also, I sent you another one about how parents can talk to teachers if their children have ADHD or dyslexia, because dyslexia it wants a friend, so it always usually has another disability along with it. Executive function is one of the main ones. And I thank you, and I wish y'all the best on the rest of the hour.
Sheila, I want to confirm I did receive those. I can't put it in the chat, but we will put it up on our website, educationtownhall.org. It will be there with a write-up of this show. So that's where you can find it. Sheila, I have so many questions, but I know you got to go. I appreciate you. I hated to call you this morning and try to wrangle you, because I know you've been busy. You're going to go back to your presentation. Thank
Well,
you.
you know what? God is good all the time, and He make a way, because we're in an RC presentation for teachers and administrators right now
Yeah.
at Gallaudet. right now, teaching them what we're trying to teach y'all. Thank
Yeah.
you much and have a
Thank
great
you.
show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. Talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye. All righty. Thanks to Sheila for her input, and I'm glad, Chioma, you are able to join us. I was a little concerned, but you're here
Oh,
now, and that's all that matters. So before I go back to Valerie, I just want you to share with us a little bit of your background, how you came to this work, and what it is that you do.
Yeah, no, so sorry, dialed in late, working on my executive functioning, put it on the calendar. And grateful for what Sheila, had to offer to the dialogue. Sorry she's gone. Great to see Maria. I feel multiply stationed here, which, I think I am multiply stationed. I mean, my first identity is as a mom. I have two brilliantly autistic sons, Etsy and Jedi, who are causing trouble elsewhere right now in school. Hopefully, they're not causing trouble. Actually, I'm going to stop saying that because they are at the age where schools love to point out when they do things that are not typical as little Black disabled boys. And as you noted, I recently joined the faculty of the Georgetown University Center for Child and Human Development. The work I'm focusing on there, well, there are many levels to the work, but one of the major projects is around helping build a more diverse workforce in early childhood special education. So that early childhood piece is really important. I love that Sheila pointed that out. And of course, looking at that two-gen relationship, which seems to be really well nurtured in the early childhood space, but not so much as we immatriculate through the school system. And find, I think it's really important that we nurture it even better and then find ways to also replicate that in the K-12 space. So those are some of my key passions. I'm a community organizer and do community work. And so through a cooperative we're incubating called Neuromama, we are hosting community programming that we hope builds relationships that can dissuade some of the bad practices that we see across disciplinary lines. And that's how I look at it, right? Like, parent is a discipline, parenting is a discipline, being a child is a discipline. I mean, like, you need your expertise. You have your expertise of experience, being a teacher, being an administrator, being a social worker, being whoever, and hopefully in ways that these relationships that do support our children and our youth, that they become healthier, better, more accountable to the people closest to the pain.
Very good. Very good. Back to you, Valerie.
Oh, well, so thank you, Dr. Oruh, for being back on, because the last time you were on was 4 years ago to talk about special education. And since you've been in DC this whole time, you've had a child in DC schools, children in DC schools. How, from your perspective as a professional, how has the provision of special education in DC's publicly funded schools changed or not changed over that time? And you can talk about your personal experiences. I mean, we're getting Nadia only secondarily through me, but she talked a lot about how, and she's testified about this before the State Board of Education, about how difficult this process has been. And she said, parents don't even know that they can get lawyers, that they have to get lawyers at some point to sue for these services. So I wanted to ask, how you, Dr. Oruh, Chioma, how has this changed from your perspective, if at all?
Oof, very loaded. And I'm glad Maria is here for emotional support, which she is.
I like to be the only lawyer capable of providing emotional support. Not a skill set like people are known for.
Well, Maria, because Maria also knows many of the layers of the personal experiences that my family has seen, as well as just being on the front lines. I consider myself forever team AJE, right? Like I'd worked as a parent support specialist for Advocates for Justice and Education, and that was, an unbelievable experience. And we continue to be in relationship with each other. So then also having that foundation in supporting so many families, informing how I think about this. So I think at the end of the day, like in the final analysis, let's start at the end. The special education system in DC is hemorrhaging, right? I mean, we had an opportunity, like the whole country and in fact the whole world, to recreate systems during the pandemic when we pressed that big pause button on life, that we continue to have all the traumatic impact from, but none of the beauties that could come from having that reset. We have still not actualized that. And in fact, I think when it comes to special education, we're going in the exact wrong direction. So I think what the pandemic has done is exposed layers and levels of underinvestments through the years. And playing catch up is not enough. We also don't have the political will on both sides, from the legislative and the executive, to actually, needle down and address this in ways. And to be fair, it's not a conversation that any state, and according to the feds, DC is a state when it comes to education, and particularly special education. So it's not something that any state can have in a vacuum. That this is federal law, and there are a lot of federal guidelines, and not in the intersectional identities of many vulnerable children, whether they be homeless or other so-called at-risk categories, and receiving special education, are not also well fleshed out at the federal level. So to that end, I feel also stationed to be able to maybe address some of that, working directly as a technical assistance provider for USED, particularly in the early childhood piece now, and hoping some of those relationships can also translate to impact in our local community, of which, heads up, AJE being the federally designated parent training and information center, PTIs in general have a strong role to play with that. So I think there's opportunity, to heal some of the things that I observed. But the reality is things are dismal. Not only kids can't write the way the Valerie displays it, the quality of life for families of children with disabilities are also downward spiral. We are the ones who would benefit from an income tax credit. We are the ones who benefit from an eviction moratorium. We're the ones who benefit from a working, functional healthcare system, in addition to an education system. And by the way, all of these things are failing us, hence the hemorrhaging, right?
Wow.
So, yeah.
You said a great deal. There's a lot to unpack there, but we've actually reached the bottom of the hour. And so I just want to remind folks that you tuned in to the Education Town Hall here on We at Radio, which is located in the heart of downtown Anacostia. However, we are coming to you live from our virtual platforms, which I consider to be Anacostia adjacent. And so we're glad to have our wonderful special guests joining us today, Maria Blauer and Chioma Oruh, who are talking from an expert knowledge of special ed. Now, I want to ask a quick question, because this came up when Sheila was sharing with us. She mentioned that educators, schools, teachers, administrators need to be knowledgeable of the law. And there's a deficiency there, which to me is causes a tremendous gap in this whole process. So if you could share, Maria, and then Chioma, you can chime in as well. How do we fix that? How do we train teachers? Because AJE, you work with parents. So how do we work on the other side of the fence with teachers and educators, administrators, and the like, to train them and help them understand what the law is and what their responsibilities are?
I think that's a great question. And I think, the core problem is one of continued segregation on multiple levels in education around disability. Even in how educators get their credentials, even how they're trained when they're in school, special education is not part of the curriculum for the overwhelming majority of educators who are coming out of school. So it is entirely possible, and this is like mind-boggling to me, that you can graduate with a degree in education or a degree in public policy with a focus on education issues and have taken no coursework that covers IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, no coursework that covers the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, no coursework that covers Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1975. So it's not part of the curriculum because and I think Chioma speaks a lot about this question in her scholarship. We don't view children with disabilities as ours, as part of the whole school learning community. They are elsewhere. They're othered, they're excluded. Even when they're in the general education classroom, their achievement isn't a metric that is relevant for the evaluation of the general educator often. So, I would say a big way we can address questions of, how can you be a principal and not know a whole lot about special education, right? How's that even like a theoretical possibility? Well, it happens because we don't think it matters that you know a lot about special education. And that's the mindset I think we need to shift.
So let me, I just got to get this in. So, I use an example. If a building becomes obsolete, you either tear it down or you retrofit it. So we've got these folks in place, principals and others in place. Essentially, how do we retrofit them in terms of their knowledge? How do we get, we have these people in place, so they're there. So we either fire everybody and bring in people who are competent in these areas, or we got to fix them. How do we fix them?
So OSSI is working on this, not maybe in the way that I would like them to work on it, but they are working on it.
Let me stop you there, right there, just for our listeners. OSSI, we're referring to, again, by an acronym, is the Office of the State Superintendent of Education in DC, which is, among other things, responsible for ensuring that all our publicly funded schools follow federal and state guidelines. Is that a fair way to say that? And take it away, Maria, sorry.
Yes, no, that is, yes, that will, except for Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act that OSSI says they can have no authority over, which bothers me so much. But we'll set that aside. OSSI's working on micro credentials for existing educators. So it's not the same as a full endorsement, but it's an opportunity for DC educators to grow their capacity to serve students with disabilities through a micro credentialing process.
So is that mandatory?
No.
So, okay, I'm not going to criticize. It's a start.
It is a start. It is a start. And I think that another place where we could see another good start is to, really think about and talk about, is it okay for students to be educated by, uncredentialed folks? What do we think of teaching credentials? And really think about that, because that's not something that we've had a lot of depth in the conversation about. But I want to highlight something you asked, and I think that it was an important question, and Chioma answered it, but I just want to highlight something really quickly. Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
You asked Chioma, what change have you seen? And I sort of looked at that question and thought about it before I got here. And I think hemorrhaging is absolutely the right word. There are multiple systems impacting families and putting a disproportionate burden on our families of students with disabilities. But in the school space, it's, and I don't want to sound alarmist, this is the worst I've seen it in many ways in 15 years. Transportation is profoundly dysfunctional. The staffing levels, there are schools that have vacant positions for extended periods of time. There's a huge shortage of evaluators, of service providers, of speech language providers. Schools are now regularly saying things like, we can't do that here because we don't have the capacity. That's not the standard. The standard is supposed to be what the child needs. And then most alarming and heartbreaking, and I'm going to refer to another professor's work now, Nicole Tachinda, who was in DC for many years, encourages folks to use the word school brutality. And we're talking about things like restraint, seclusion, violence against children. We here at AJE talk to a lot of families, and I have received more calls this year about kids being hit in schools, being restrained in schools, being mysteriously injured at schools. And I can't, it's so alarming. And it means that, the school is at capacity, the individual teacher is at capacity, right? I mean, nothing is working well. Multiple systems have to fail if a kid is getting hit at school by a school staff member. And we've seen an increase in that. And I just think that is such a red flag for all the systems that Chioma mentioned. And I think, and I've also become a big fan of that phrase, school brutality, because it just captures what it is. And it reminds us that schools are agents of the state. And it's a good centering concept. So I wanted to, this is why you need to end on a positive note, by the way, Mr. Bird. Because people like me, school brutality, it's terrible.
Towards the end of the show, we will give you an opportunity to end on a positive note. We like to, end on positively.
Well, we can ask this question though, Thomas. You always ask. The motto of We Act Radio is do something.
Yes.
And one of the things that I'm sort of struck by with this conversation is that those of us who are parents have had some connection to the provision of these services that are legally required, and we've all sort of come up against barriers to the provisions. And one of the things that we haven't talked about as a barrier is money. So I want to give an example from my own experience. So I have a child who has had a 504 plan, and we had many years at the same school where we had all these issues, and we ran around circles not knowing what to do until finally there was an evaluation for a 504 plan. This school was not small.
Plan?
Yes, a 504 plan under the federal law that Maria talked about that I don't have my note right in front of me.
Rehabilitation Act.
Yes, there you go.
All right.
And it's it's so the student can be supported in his or her activities at school appropriately. In any case, this school was not small. Over 500 kids were at this school. And it had taken us literally years to get to this point. And so I asked one of the social workers, I said, so how many kids here have 504 plans? This is a school with nearly 600 students. She said 17. That just is absolutely mathematically impossible that only 17 kids out of nearly 600 needed a 504 plan or some sort of special support system for learning that is federally provided. And in fact, our earlier guest, Sheila Carr, talked about this, that at any given moment in a class with 20 students, there could be 4 or 5 who have dyslexia. So I just wanted to use that as a pretext for the next part of the do something, which to me is the low-hanging fruit, is the money piece of it. Why are you rationing a service unless you just don't have enough people to deal with it, to bring it about? And so is that one of the answers here, is that we just need to pour a lot more money into the provision of special education services in DC's publicly funded schools. Thank you. Take it away.
That's a great question. And I think, Chioma, can we tag team this? Does that work?
Yeah, sure.
I like tag team. I like tag
Right,
team.
right. So I'm going to say that I am not a budget expert. There is another woman who recently left the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, who I would encourage you to invite, Quabila Huddleston, who is a genius on the budget.
She is.
She is. She's amazing.
Yes.
I think money is part of the problem, but where we put the money is a bigger part of the problem. So there's that. And then there is the reality that, for example, Section 504 comes with no additional federal support, right? Only IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which is for students who have disabilities that require specialized instruction, which is a smaller subset of the kids who, may qualify for 504. That comes with some additional funding, but 504 plans don't. And that's real, because that's why we see so many lousy 504 plans, because there's no institutional support available to them.
But I have to jump in. I don't understand why a 504 plan will be developed without putting resources behind it. What's the point?
I have not worked in a school for many years. I will say that, as I understand some people's thinking, it's that it shouldn't be a resource intensive process. For example, a 504 does provide services in the district. So you can have like speech language therapy under a 504 plan in the district, which is unique and I think a very good thing. But a lot of times the services are more like sitting in the front of the room, extended time, having a graphic organizer, having access to a counselor during the day, having access to a cool off time. And we like to pretend in budgeting that that is free. It is not free. It is not, I want to reiterate, it is not free. But we act like it is because it's harder to see the dollar amount. And I think that's a big myth in how we do school budgets.
And that's my very point. You made it very clear. It's not free. So why isn't there honesty in the process? We know these things aren't free. Why don't we allocate funding specifically for these 504 plan needs? Valerie just asked about the money, and that is where you find people's desires and their priorities, where they put the money. And so I won't belabor that. Chioma, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was like, can I jump in there? And in the sense, so I think, yes, 504s, we have we're walking down a slippery slope. I think that we're going to not get a lot of unity around, because it is a contentious, controversial topic that's supported by two sides of evidence, that there's an over-identification, right, issue, and there's an under-identification issue, right? And I think how we can maybe explain that is that certain categories of disabilities, schools are real easy to slap a label on a child and mislabel and not treat and be unqualified to do anything about that condition, right? They just talk about it to stereotype the child. And then the flip side of that is, that a child actually needs help, but because they do not appear in the stereotypical way as somebody who should need help, they are seen as somebody that should be punished, or just not supported in their need. And I think in DC we unfortunately have both sides of the problem, hence the hemorrhaging, right? And I think when it comes to 504, I don't know if I would be part of the campaign that says, oh, let's give more kids 504 plans, because I'm not sure that would solve anything, right, per se. I think the part of the political will issue is that we do have a democracy problem in education in DC. We do know it, right, in terms of like how the money moves, the accountability and transparency around how the money moves, who has agency down to the school level. I don't like the principals kind of operate like charlatans, unchallenged in the system, right? And the best example of that is that principals can come out as an invisible organized force to ask for SROs, for example, but be completely invisible and silent on places that they actually have, almost unguarded powers, right? They share powers with the mayor, who kind of, kind of gives them permission to act this way because we do have mayoral control. And so they are the lowest level appointees, unfortunately, they're not the lowest level appointees, but they are a pretty much down the totem pole so that any decision made at the school level can happen and happen unaccounted, and the principal can lose their job or keep their job or find a new job somewhere else. But the problems, like Sheila said, the kid is only 5, 7, 10, 15 once, right? So there is that issue in terms of like participatory democracy. Budget season, I unfortunately is kind of like a joke now because I can't really see what we do qualitatively to shift the budget. Let's look at, for example, what's happening with the budget now. Like a lot of the parents testified about OCDOT, yet I think it went under challenge that OCDOT's budget was cut.
So we should, I want to just interject here. So there has been a long-standing problem with ensuring that the busing of students for special education services is provided adequately and in a timely manner for students across the District of Columbia. And it really came to a head, I think it was in January of this year. Please, I'm sure you both know better than I how exactly this played out, but it really came to a head where parents just never saw any buses, so the kids never got to school. So in addition to the kids being late, a lot of kids never actually got to school, and it's a continuing nightmare. So I'm sorry,
that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the tip of the iceberg with DOT.
Right, and I would say that OCDOT's challenges are a great example of the democracy gap that DC public education has, because the mayor sets the budget, right? They are struggling to do their job right now tremendously over at OSSI. They had a significant cut in the budget for transportation, and yet the agency head is saying my budget is sufficient to meet our needs. That doesn't make any sense. And it's just the perfect example of exactly what Chioma was talking about with the democracy problem.
So let me ask
I
you a
also
question.
think, can I add one more thing to this here in terms of the 504? Like, I think an actual tangible solution that DC is a leader of to make sure that every child kind of has that accommodated need is that DC is a leader not only in early childhood like implementation, but it's also an emerging leader in school-based mental health. And I think a lot of the 504 plans or a lot of the need for accommodations or the hardest needs, let me say, to accommodate our behavioral health needs, right? Because there just isn't that system investment in that. And there's usually a behavioral component to every physical condition that also goes under examine as to how to support it. DC does have a comprehensive school-based mental health program if it is properly implemented and decarcerated, because we have a community research project looking at the carceral logic in that law, but it has a lot of potential that if it is defanged in terms of the punitive nature, the things that can, the historic traumas that come from disclosing information, from having relationships that are disclosable, that allow you to disclose information, we have to invest in that program. And I think we'll be able to see that whole child model, that actually whole child, whole school, whole whatever model comes out of DC, right? And is being floundered in academia and federal spaces, but it is based and rooted in analyzing the needs of DC children, but it is not being funded, implemented. And I think we'll get a lot further than that in terms of supporting that program than the 504.
So let me ask a question. I know years ago now, a lot of students were being bused outside of the district, and elsewhere around who knows where, because the accommodations and services were not available within DCPS. Is that still a huge issue? Is that still going on, or has DC built capacity within the system to accommodate the majority of students?
I would say that the majority of students can and are served in DC by DC's publicly funded schools, but there is a huge and disproportionate, like the largest in the nation by a factor of three. We have more kids in non-public schools in the district than anywhere else in the nation. And those non-public schools, parents have less rights when they're navigating that space. The children have less rights. The District of Columbia has essentially contracted out the education of some of its most vulnerable students. And those schools are traditionally outside of the district usually. It is it's a huge issue. One, because the families don't have the same legal rights at those schools sometimes. But also because it puts a vulnerable kid on a bus for 2 hours. So to answer your question, no, they have decided not to meet their needs. They've decided not to invest in a system that serves the full range of kids with disabilities. DC does not have a residential program for young people who need disabilities. They contract that out. It is really, it's infuriating. I mean, to contract that out. And I would just the school-based mental health part, I agree 110%. That is a bright spot. But just like just like the education side, DC's got huge gaps in that continuum. There is no partial day hospitalization program in the District of Columbia for young people. None. There's no intensive outpatient program for these kids. And that's a huge gap in a continuum of services that is very analogous to the kids who are being bussed out, to non-publics.
So we've got 7 minutes left in the show. This show has been progressing so quickly. I mean, there are so many questions and so many things to talk about, and you guys have been great. So I think we want to kind of talk about solutions in terms from your perspectives, from yours, Maria, and from yours, Chioma. How do we fix all this stuff that needs to be fixed? It's so much, and I know it's, as I told Sheila, it's a heavy lift to get in 7 minutes or 6 minutes, but I want to kind of talk about solutions. What needs to be done to right this ship?
Okay, so I'm gonna go. So I think that we can federally start with fully funding the IDEA, right? Like I know that's a long shot, but it has to happen. We have to put that agenda on the table. There is a federal obligation that has not been met, and they get off the hook. The states are left holding the bag on this question in terms of how can special education or specialized instruction and the staff that support that be properly employed in the school systems. Locally, I think that we have an obligation to fix our democracy problems, and I think that there's the big lift in terms of like can we end mayoral control? That'd be nice, but that's I don't know. As an organizer, I don't know if that's low hanging fruit. That's really complicated. A lot of kids are going to be casualties before we get there. So I think again with school-based mental health, I think there's a lot of promise on multiple levels. One, there is the reality of needing to set up a technical assistance process that OSSI should be at the helm of also supporting. OSSI is the data house for special education. If anyone knows where the needs are, if anyone knows what's happening in terms of the LEAs, OSSI should have a landscape view and therefore should know where targeted interventions at the school level, consultation level can be made to help with professional development of staff, to help even with recruitment. Work with the universities because every special educator is coming out of a university system. And so can we work with higher ed to improve the curriculum? And we have, by the way, 6 great institutions in this great city, not to mention the connection to other institutions around the world. Lastly, I think that we should also look at the democracy map that's being set in school-based mental health. Right now, without legislative oversight, OSSI is also the data house for school-based mental health, Can you do a better job of analyzing your special ed data, mental health data? Every school has to submit a behavioral health plan every year as to what they're going to do at the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 level. Can you do that better in a way that helps you measure outcomes and improve what's happening? And that whole school-based mental health process can be democratically assigned much better. I've been an appointed member since 2017, and it's a horrible system without any real guidance that won't allow us to actually properly improve how we implement any specialized instruction, special ed, mental health, 504, and the range.
So, Chioma, I got to ask real quickly, how do we get OSSI off their asses to do the job that they're supposed to be doing? I mean, is there a legislative fix?
I think we do have to look legislatively in terms of how to fix OSSI. I believe the superintendent should be an elected person, because if they were independently accountable, of course, the state board, which is also trying to ask for more power, and be careful what you wish for, but I think you deserve that, because we also need to know what you're doing in State Board of Education and hold you accountable to us, and let that process work.
So Maria, you've got about 4 minutes to kind of put a cap on this, bow on it, however you want to categorize it.
I'll take a bow. I like it.
Okay.
So a couple of things. You asked for what to do. I think Chioma's right that we need to have aggressive monitoring and enforcement, and that's probably got to come from OSSI. And OSSI needs to have the authority to do that. And I think that this goes to the bright spot question. The district has some of the best laws in the country. It does. I mean, there's just laws that other parts of the country should be jealous of and are jealous of. However, implementation of that and enforcement of that is non-existent. And OSSI has a role to play in that. And I think that's part of that conversation about what to do, is strengthening them so they can do that and have the authority. And I also think that the work that Decoding Dyslexia did is a great example of a model for how change can happen. And, Nadia's work, Don't Back Down, DC, which is exactly what parents need to do, right? You can't back down. And that's just such a burden to put on families, but you got to just be this persistent force. But Sheila and Carla, they got the law passed. So let's just talk about like mom power. They got the law passed. They got the law funded. And now they are running down and making sure the law actually is being implemented. As advocates, we need to do the whole thing. And that's from passing it to funding it. It is maddening to me that students with disabilities have had full and equal access to federal programs for, over 40 years, close to 50 years. And we still have kids getting kicked out of daycare and agencies in the district saying they can't do anything about it. So I think monitoring and enforcement is huge. And I should clarify, kids getting kicked out of daycare for reasons of their disability. Which is, categorically unacceptable. So I think anything around that part is important. And I would encourage folks to get involved in the organizations that are out there. Decoding Dyslexia does great work. They also provide a huge amount of emotional support, which is needed because of that burden shift that we've talked about this whole time. Chioma does great work supporting families and providing them the emotional and physical support. AJE, we do a lot of parent training. We do a lot of parent coaching. I see that it's probably a good idea that we mention who we are and how to find us. Easiest way to find us.
I was going to ask, yes, please.
Real quickly, we got about 40 seconds.
Just Google Advocates for Justice in Education. It's probably the easiest way to do it. And we're on all the socials, but I will throw it to Chioma to pitch everybody else.
Well, we've actually run out of time. I'm literally now.
Well, if you find AJE, you find Chioma. Let's say that.
all right. Listen, this has been outstanding. I want to thank you both, Chioma as well as Maria, for joining us. Chioma Oruh is the professor at the Georgetown University Center of Child and Human Development, And Maria Gloria is the Director of Programs and Outreach at Advocates for Justice and Education. I want to thank Sheila Carr for joining us early, who is with Decoding Dyslexia. And folks, we want to thank you for joining us today on the Education Town Hall. I want to thank my co-host and co-producer, Valerie Jabla. I want to thank Virginia Spatz for her technical assistance. I want to thank everyone tuning in. Until the next episode of the Education Town Hall, be good to somebody. This is your humble servant and host, Thomas Bird. Peace.